Good afternoon, everybody. We are going to begin in about 2 minutes. If you are an attendee to this town hall meeting, we're going to ask that you submit the questions through the Q&A link. It's at the bottom of the screen, and that will be where we are taking questions. We'll start in about 2 minutes. Thank you.
Why am I Stella?
Good afternoon, everybody. I want to welcome you to the second of actually 3 town hall meetings that we are having today here in Santa Clara Unified School District to share the plan and answer questions regarding the reopening for our schools in the fall. If we could go ahead and move on to the welcome slide, slide 3, please. I want to introduce myself. I'm Dr. Stella Kemp. I'm the superintendent here in Santa Clara Unified. I wanted to start by saying, recognizing that, these are very difficult times for all of us, no doubt. The nearly daily updates, news, and changing guidelines about COVID-19 across our region, state, and country is overwhelming, to say the least. And the impact of this virus on our personal and professional lives will last for some time. I want you to know that we are all in this together, and we want what is best for our students, families, and staff. And as we begin this evening, I just want to say that I hope that everyone who's joining us today is well, and that your families are doing well too. Before we begin this town hall meeting, I want to share with you that there are 2 options to view the town hall. The town hall webinar is open via Zoom, and I see we have about 600 attendees in here. And while this technology is fantastic, there are some limitations to the number of folks who can attend the webinar. So we are also streaming this via our YouTube channel, which is located, you can find the link located at www.santaclarausd.org/live stream. It is my recommendation, if you don't intend to submit a question or after you've submitted a question, that you exit the webinar and watch via the district's YouTube channel. If you would later like to submit a question, you can re-enter the webinar and submit your question. So we have a little bit, we're almost at 700 attendees. We have a maximum of 3,000. So you guys can kind of see what it looks like out there. Before we start this evening, I want to acknowledge the folks who are behind the scenes. And as I introduce you, if you just turn on your camera and give a wave, our IT director, Joe Ayala, who is assisting us with all things tech tonight, and our Q&A team, which is Jennifer Dorico, our Director of Communications and Public Information, Karen Allard, Director of Professional Learning, and Kevin Keegan, the Assistant Superintendent of HR. I would also like to welcome our Board of Trustees and our teacher and classified support staff union presidents who are listening in this evening. Our board is here tonight as members of the community to listen. There is a board meeting scheduled for tomorrow evening with a public session beginning at 7:15, and this will also be streamed through our YouTube channel. I'd like to introduce our panelists and members of my cabinet, Dr. Brenda Carrillo, Director of Student Services, who leads our health and safety team. Mr. Eric Dill, Chief Business Official, leading our operations team. And new to our district since July the 1st is Mr. Brad Stam, our Chief Academic and Innovation Officer, who leads the teaching and learning teams. And each of these leaders is charged with overseeing the implementation of our back to school plan. These district leaders will assist our reopening efforts in their areas of expertise and experience. Next slide. Slide 4, please. Thank you. The feedback loop has been a hallmark of our planning process, and I want to express our appreciation to all stakeholder voices as we engage in thought partnership to open schools safely and in the best interest of students. I want to acknowledge and express my gratitude for the hundreds of hours and thousands of survey responses from our students, families, staff, and community leaders in development of the reopening plan. And as a district, we look forward to engaging with you, and we will ensure that your unique perspective is reflected in the implementation of this plan. Information continues to change day by day, and our plan reflects our best thinking with the information we have right now. We shared this plan with the community last Friday, and we hope that you've had a chance to review it. If you have not, you can find the plan on our website. Tonight, we'll be discussing that plan, and we look forward to your input. We expect to spend about 20 minutes going over some highlights from the plan, and then we'll spend about another 40 minutes or longer, if necessary, to answer high-level questions. And I remind everyone, questions need to be posted into the Q&A at the bottom of the Zoom chat. The planning to reopening of the schools is difficult and multifaceted, and it's never perfect and impossible to make 100% of our stakeholders happy. The ever-changing public health crisis, expert opinion, and guidance means that our plans will need to continue to shift. However, our focus on safety by implementing public health expert guidance, high-quality teaching and learning following best practices, and our commitment to timely and transparent communication and community engagement opportunities will remain steadfast priorities for me and for our district. One of the main purposes of our community engagement events this week is to understand what your questions are. So to begin with, we're going to go ahead and launch a poll because I'd like to see who's in the meeting. Do we have who's in our webinar so we can launch that. So Joe, if you're ready. The first question is a question about who are you? Are you a student, a staff member, family member, community member? And the second question is, how did you connect with the input for the development of this plan? Have you completed a survey? Did you participate on a planning team, or have you done none to date? We had this same survey for our staff. We did a town hall with them about an hour ago. And we had over 200 staff members that had indicated that they had participated in some kind of planning in the staff session. Joe, can I see the results?
I can share the results once the poll is done.
Okay, all right. Joe, the last time I saw the countdown, so.
Yeah, just a second.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you. Excellent. So we have, what's interesting is we have about 650 parents or family members that are here. And of that, about 590 people have taken at least one survey. We have 77 staff members that are here. 46 of those have been on a planning team. We have 23 students. Welcome, students. We appreciate you being here this evening. And we have some folks who've not provided any inputs. About 150 folks who've not provided any input. So 82% of the folks who have who are attending now have voted in this first poll. All right, let's move right along then. Next slide, please. So I just want to remind folks that we are going to be taking your questions through the Q&A. And if we could have you as well know that if we don't get to all the questions, because what we'll do when we get to the Q&A is we will read out the frequently asked questions. So those big topics, and then we'll have a Q&A document that we'll have on our website. So we may not get to all of your questions, but we'll try to get to as many as we can. Okay, next slide. So I just wanted to remind the public that we have 4 guiding principles. Slide 6, please, Joe. 4 guiding principles in the design of our reopening plan around health and safety, teaching and learning, communication and supports, and social and emotional well-being. And I wanted to also share, if we'll move to slide 8, that we look at the reopening as a phased process. So with phase 1 being majority of the students in distance learning, and this really is based on we're living in a different world now, a COVID-19 world where we know things are going to be different. When we closed schools in March, there were 47 cases of COVID in Santa Clara County, and now there are about 247 today in the county. We do not yet have metrics to determine when we're going to move to phase 2. There are multiple factors related to the reopening. It's not just about the case counts. And many of you have asked me, like, what define the trigger that's going to move us to the next phase. And in this case, would be moving from those who are in distance learning to the hybrid model or to the in-person. And the decision really is related to our ability to implement the public health department protocols to ensure safety for students and for staff. And so we don't know what the stabilizing numbers are. We have asked the county Office of Education, Public Health Department to help us develop those guidelines so that the districts across Santa Clara County can be unified in those decisions to make sure that we're providing for safety for students, staff, and for our families as well. So there is a webinar that is going to be scheduled, for Friday through the Santa Clara County Office of Education, and it's called The Science of Reopening Schools. And I encourage you to view this webinar if you can on Friday afternoon or on Saturday when they post the link. This will be very informative, and it will be led by our local health officials in the guidance that they use to develop the reopening plans. So one last thing, if we go on to the next slide, we want to offer our parents options, and we know that it'll be necessary for us to address the needs of every family is different. And so we honor our core values of empathy and equity. And we know that our plans need to consider support for families who are struggling to make ends meet during this challenging and uncertain time, and who generally fear impending homelessness, so that they have to go back to work because it is a matter of survival for them. So we provided options for the families. However, we'll prioritize the in-person learning around criteria that's being developed. And for the most part, what we can say today is that priority will be given to essential workers and special populations, including special education, low income, and foster and homeless youth. We also need to make sure that we have teaching and staff ready to carry out the high quality teaching and learning and the successful plan for the reopening of schools. And once our plan has been updated based on the community input we received this week, we ultimately have to negotiate with our associations and have the plan approved by the Board of Trustees before it is finalized. And this plan will be going to the board at the end of July. And if we go on to slide number 10, I just wanted to reiterate the speaking points that I just shared with you guys around prioritizing our students, making sure that we are phasing in. And we know that particularly for students that are transitioning from elementary to middle to high school, that we may have to bring them in for a short period, a day or two, to do to transition the students, or like our ninth graders who are new to high school, naturally will have to go into the high school to get materials or whatnot. And we're working on the plan for that, and we'll have more details later regarding those transition grades. So now what I'd like to do is I'd like to hand it over to Mr. Eric Dill, who is our Chief Business Official.
Okay, if we can move forward 2 slides, please. So regardless of the way in which we transition to reopening the schools, we know that students and staff will need to follow new procedures for health screening and hygiene. It's very possible that the guidance we receive from local, state, and federal authorities will change between now and the first day we welcome students and staff back to school. So we recognize that we are going to need to be agile. Please know we're preparing plans to ensure the health and safety of the children and adults on campus, and that we will educate our families and staff before reopening school. If we need to change our practices because the health orders change, we will adapt and do that. The reopening plans will include daily health screenings, identifying people with symptoms, educating families and employees on health information, our expectations that sick people stay at home, hand washing procedures, physical distancing guidelines, our face covering expectations, and proper etiquette. We want to make sure that we will make sure that our classroom and restroom sinks are well stocked with soap and towels, because that's the most effective way to clean your hands. but we have ordered more than 600 hand sanitizer dispensers to place throughout our schools in areas where there are either no classroom sinks or no nearby restrooms. We've ordered plexiglass shields to protect our front office staff from folks who are coming in from the outside. And we will also have procedures to handle students and staff who become sick while they're at school and reporting protocols. We also plan to bring in additional staff for the health offices. So if we go to the next slide, please. We've had many questions about our cleaning and sanitizing procedures and how we will handle physical distance. All of the interior spaces will be cleaned and sanitized at least daily, with additional attention paid to frequently touched surfaces like door handles, desks, counters, faucets, lunch tables, restroom facilities, and play areas. Each classroom will have a supply of disinfecting wipes, and as I mentioned, either a classroom sink or nearby hand sanitizing station. Doors and windows may be open to bring in the fresh air. Our air conditioning systems will be reprogrammed to bring in as much outdoor air as possible to avoid recycling the air. We will be using the highest recommended filters for air conditioning systems, and those will be replaced regularly. In terms of physical distancing, sharing of desks and school materials are going to be limited and will be cleaning between each use. We've evaluated each classroom space to determine how many desks can fit in a room and in what layout under several different physical distancing scenarios. So whether it's a maximum capacity scenario or it's a X number of feet scenario, we've laid out each one of the classroom spaces, and we've shared that with administrators so that they can work with teachers to figure out what the best layout is under whichever guidelines we're operating under. And those layouts will help us keep a safe distance, not only between students, but also students and teachers. With that, I'll turn it over to the next presenter.
Thank you. Next slide, please. Now that we've made the decision to start the year in distance learning, the central office, in collaboration with teachers and principals, is designing the highest quality distance learning program, drawing on the experience of the spring and improving upon that, and also best practices from around the country and around the world. We are going to be offering distance learning for the entire year as an option for families who select it. We are designing that application process now, and more information will be coming soon. Families who initially select a 100% distance learning option will be able to transfer their child into the hybrid learning at the trimester breaks if the district has moved into hybrid learning. However, we cannot guarantee that they will be enrolled in their home school. For the elementary distance learning model, here are some features that will be important to you. Students will have a dedicated teacher and access to high quality digital applications and resources, including Chromebooks. They'll have a consistent daily schedule that begins and ends with classroom connections and live instruction. There will be 2 morning blocks and 1 afternoon block that allow for a variety of student configurations and interaction with their teacher. There'll be a strong emphasis on social emotional learning and well-being, as well as academics, and students will be learning the essential standards for the grade level. Daily instructional minutes will comply with state requirements, and we will be engaging in discussion with the teachers union soon about how that will play out. Teachers will use digital tools that will provide real-time data about students' potential unfinished learning while providing students with additional practice to accelerate learning. We're aware that there has been learning loss because of distance learning and the summer, so we will prioritize individual and small group support, both in person and virtually, for students demonstrating the highest needs based on our ongoing assessments. Teachers will return to standard grading practices as outlined in our board policy, and trimester report cards will communicate student progress toward meeting or exceeding grade level standards. If and when we do phase in hybrid instruction, as Dr. Kemp said, we will emphasize and prioritize certain populations of students, including special education pre-kindergarten, transitional kindergarten, students with special needs, homeless and foster youth, English learners, and a few others to receive priority for phased in for in-person instruction. As plans continue to develop and more information becomes available, we will update you all in the community, and schools will be able to provide their own updates to you as well after the board approves the district reopening plan. With that, I'm going to invite Assistant Superintendent Kathy Knable to talk to you about our developing schedules. These are not final schedules, but our developing schedules for elementary. Kathy?
Thank you, Brad. Next slide, please. Here is a very general sample schedule for elementary. As Brad explained, it's a very high-level example. And in designing this schedule, much consideration is being given to the feedback that we received from parents regarding increasing the amount of live instruction, and also from staff regarding clearer guidelines and expectations, as well as more implementation support for distance learning instruction. As you can see here, we are considering building in time in the schedule for teacher collaboration, small group support, and parent conferences in the afternoon. And we are also preparing distance learning resources for teachers and parents, common guidelines for Google Classroom, and a structure for our teachers to share effective practices, not only with themselves, but also to share resources with parents. We are continuing to work on more detailed aspects of a schedule and are planning specialized schedules for our youngest students, our pre-K students with disabilities, our preschools, our transitional kindergarten, and our kindergarten will have distance learning schedules that more closely align to their typical beginning of the year modified schedules. Next slide, please. When we are able to shift to a hybrid instructional schedule, should health and safety conditions allow, we will cohort students and move to a schedule like the sample you see here on the lower half of this slide. This schedule brings a smaller group and brings smaller groups and keeps them in stable cohorts while providing distance learning to the other cohort. We will also prioritize bringing our youngest students back in person, such as this TK sample schedule on the top of the slide. Our pre-K, TK, and kinders will benefit from engaging in some in-person activities to build relationships with their teachers and with small groups of their peers when it is safe to do so. And now I'll turn it back to Brad.
Thank you, Kathy. Just like with elementary, the central office, teachers, principals, and others are working hard to design a high-quality distance learning instructional program for secondary schools, that is middle schools and high schools, that is interactive, engaging, and again, grounded in the essential standards for each subject area and grade level. As with elementary, we're planning both guidance and support for teacher teams at our schools. This includes a large array of professional development offerings to be available soon. We've learned from the spring when we had to make a rapid transition to distance learning that teachers had to learn very quickly many of the tools and platforms and applications in order to provide a quality digital learning experience. So we're building upon that and supporting teachers to increase their expertise at distance learning so that your child will receive the highest quality distance learning program available. This will be, again, an option for the entire year for families who selected distance learning. We're designing that process now. Families who initially select a 100% distance learning option will be able to transfer their child into hybrid learning at the semester break in secondary if the district has moved into hybrid learning. However, we cannot guarantee that they will be enrolled in their home school. The distance learning model for secondary includes students will be assigned a coursework that meets their individual needs in both core content areas and in electives. Students will have access to high quality digital applications and resources, including Chromebooks. They'll have a structured and consistent weekly block schedule. That's an extended period of time, a block. Each class period will include live instruction and class connections with the teacher. Daily instructional minutes will comply with state requirements. Teachers will use digital tools that provide real-time data about students' potential unfinished learning. Just like with elementary, we know that there have been some learning loss, and we will prioritize individual and small group support, both in person and virtually, for students demonstrating the highest needs based on our ongoing assessment. Teachers will return to standard grading practices as outlined in our board policy. And if and when we do phase into hybrid instruction, certain populations of students will receive priority for in-class instruction, including students with special needs, homeless and foster youth, English learners, and 6th and 9th grade students transitioning into their new school. And with that, I'm going to ask Kathy Knable again to talk about some emerging designs for secondary schedules in distance and hybrid learning. Kathy?
Next slide, please. Thanks, Brad. So here's a sample secondary distance learning schedule, one that is emerging for us. And as you can see, each Monday, the week is launched with a full schedule of 6 periods in middle school and 7 periods in our comprehensive high schools, allowing for teachers to set up instructional expectations for the week. Tuesday through Friday is a block schedule with longer class periods, allowing for project-based and deeper learning experiences. Built into this schedule is additional support time for students in the afternoon, as well as a common collaboration and professional learning and staff time each morning, which also allows for a later start time for students. Should health and safety conditions allow, and by following the safety guidelines for social distancing in small groups, transitional years such as 6th and 9th grade could be brought in for onboarding and orientation activities during the distance learning schedule. We are also planning for specialized distance learning schedules for our secondary alternative schools. Next slide. This sample hybrid schedule for middle and high school brings an added level of complexity. As you can see, consistent with the elementary hybrid model, all students will have distance learning on Monday, allowing the teachers again to set up expectations for the week. For the remainder of the week, the students are broken into 2 cohorts, A and B. On a day when cohort A is in person, cohort B is distance learning and vice versa. The complexity comes when the block schedule is added. As you can see here, each cohort is in person 2 days per week, attending each of their classes in person once per week for a longer block of time. We continue to consider other aspects of hybrid secondary schedules, striving for partial cohorting, the need for masks and physical distancing, and prioritizing the amount of live instructional time that students have with their teachers and peers. In the hybrid models, each week students will have in-class instruction, live distance instruction, and independent distance learning time. When health and safety requirements do permit, certain courses or student groups would receive priorities for in-person learning. And the similarities between the distance learning schedule and the hybrid schedule allow for very easy transition between the two should health and safety conditions require us to change back and forth at any time. And I will hand it over to the next presenter.
Okay, that is me. So if we could move forward a couple slides here. Just a quick note on technology. We will continue to support the one-to-one Chromebook initiative the way that parents and families and students saw in the spring. For food service, because we will no longer be able to serve in a cafeteria style as we're used to, we'll be moving to an easy online ordering system that will be in place for students who receive free breakfast and lunch, and also for those students who pay for meals. That way we can bag up those lunches and get those delivered to classrooms before lunch. And lunch will be outside rather than inside of a multi-purpose room or a cafeteria to the extent possible. It may be at some locations we'll need to have lunch inside of classrooms or on rainy days. The school breakfast and lunch will be available to pre-order for students who are also in independent study. So they'd be able to pick up a week's worth of meals on those days when students are no longer on campus. For transportation, we're looking to continue to provide service to those schools that we are already providing bus service for. Because we may not be able to transport as many students on a bus because of capacity and social distancing issues, We're working on schedules that would allow us to double up the number of buses on bus stops, but that might mean that we would have to move school schedules around so that we could make sure that kids are not dropped off too early or picked up too late, and twice as many buses can serve just as many kids. We will be asking families to screen their children for symptoms before sending them to the bus stop to keep their sick children at home, just as we would ask for those families who are dropping their students off. Physical distance would be required at bus stops, and everyone on the bus would be required to wear a face covering. We are looking at seat assignments so that we can keep physical distance, and also to load and unload in a way where there is as little contact as possible between other students and also the adults. Now, if we have to use buses for more than one school, we would be sanitizing the buses in between runs, and we would have the windows down to bring in as much fresh air as weather permits. And now I turn it over to Dr. Carrillo.
Thank you, Eric. One of the areas of focus that our district planning has been looking at is childcare for families, including after-school programs. We know from parent survey results that childcare is a significant need for some parents to be able to fully return to work. So we do plan to continue to offer a full range of childcare programs in the fall, in line with current health and safety guidelines. While we do expect our capacity for enrollment at this time to be impacted, we also expect to be able to serve more children as these guidelines continue to morph and change. More information on our childcare options is going to be forthcoming in the next week. We're also looking at athletics because we do recognize that athletics are an integral part of our students' school experience. We did develop some guidelines for summer programs that were focused on conditioning, and those were really looking at how we could ensure safe participation in voluntary athletic training activities. Those guidelines covered different areas, including safety measures, use of facilities, screening, and social distancing, and also parent permission. And certainly athletics is an area that we're going to continue to focus on in our ongoing planning. The next slide, I believe, is Brad.
The educational success and social emotional well-being of our English learner students and our students with special needs is a top priority for the district. And both of these student populations, as we said, are a priority for phase in to hybrid, if and when we go to hybrid and in-person instruction. With distance learning for our English learner students and their families, we will provide prioritized access to in-person learning if and when health and safety conditions permit, designated English language development instruction, additional learning supports as needed, translation services, family support and training, including technology and internet access with troubleshooting support, and virtual office hours with the Family Resource Center and community partners. For students with special needs and their families, we will provide increased live instruction with the support of instructional aides, designated supports and services as outlined in their individual education plans, family support and training, including technology and internet access with troubleshooting support. And I'll send it back to Brenda for the next slide.
Great, thank you, Brad. We've mentioned this a few times already, but we definitely have a focus on supporting our students who are in situations where they are in foster care or facing situations of homelessness. And we do have 2 bilingual school community liaisons, and those liaisons are working very closely with these families. We recognize that in some cases, access to technology is an issue, and so we are doing a lot of outreach to families that find themselves in those circumstances, and we are going to continue to do outreach to these families that's unique to their specific needs. With respect to mental health and wellness, we do anticipate that students, families, and our school community will likely have an increased need for social and emotional support. And we've been thoughtfully planning and developing additional resources that we may need to draw from. We are launching a new online support service for students, families, and for staff that is going to offer 24/7 support. We are also developing social emotional learning curriculum and strategies, which will be a focus as we think about our return to school activities. We're partnering with outside agencies to ensure that if we have needs that emerge that are outside of the school's realm, that we can have appropriate services for families. And we're engaging with teachers and staff to also build personal and professional resilience and capacity as we think about the transition back to various learning environments. Next slide, please. We're certainly want to continue to partner with our students and our families and focus on engagement. We're definitely committed to ensuring that all of our students and their families are engaged in the educational experience, regardless of the modality. We do recognize that distance learning requires us to pursue opportunities for engagement much more strategically. So with respect to students, we're working closely with school sites to implement multiple strategies to proactively monitor daily attendance and engagement. We definitely anticipate reaching out to students who need more support with engaging with distance learning, and offer wellness services and community referrals as well. We're also looking at different ways in which we might augment the services that are offered through our Family Resource Center, which is a real benefit to our families and our Santa Clara community. With respect to professional learning, we do know that children learn best when their social and emotional needs are met. And so our staff will receive training and support strategies that will promote a whole child approach to teaching and learning. We're also going to be providing training in the area of health, which is obviously a big issue when we're talking about this health situation that we are in. These strategies will not only support student well-being, but we see them as being structured to support the well-being of our entire staff and our school community at large. And with that, I'll pass it back to Dr. Kim.
Dr. Carrillo, thank you so much for finishing up the slides. So we've gone a little bit over, about 15 minutes over what we expected for the introduction. So we will extend the town hall meeting by 15 minutes. We currently have about 300 questions that have been submitted, and our team in the background has been sorting these questions. We're going to go through and answer the questions that that showed up in larger frequency, so that, and then if there are other ones, we'll enter those into the FAQs to assist our families. So the first question, I'm going to start with the communication questions. There are 3 or 4 that have come up predominantly from the families. And one is, when must parents decide what learning mode they prefer? We are going to open up our SchoolMint section, SchoolMint preference program for parents this Friday. Dr. Carrillo has been working on the background with her team and with our enrollment center to create that link for parents to choose which program that they would prefer. We would love to have all of our parents complete this by July the 24th. The reason that we need this information is because it will help us to identify which staff will go into which program and to build master schedule at our high schools. So it's middle schools and high schools. So it's important that parents complete this, and we'll be working on getting that communication out to you later this week with the links. Additionally, we are asking all of our families, if you haven't done so yet, please go into your SchoolMint account and update your contact information. The annual forms that you complete each year are there in SchoolMint. There's a question about sports and athletics for students who don't return to school in the fall. The athletic program is actually done through the Silicon Valley Athletic League, and it's really up in the air right now what will be offered this fall. The league meets and makes recommendations that come to the league superintendents, and then we work with them and the coaches to determine what we're going to do. As you know, many teams have already suspended their Stanford, for instance, has suspended its non-division games, or whatever it's called, non-conference games for this next year. And there's some other professional programs that have made a decision not to have in-person events. So we don't know yet is the answer. So we're working on that, and we'll get that out as soon as we can. Yes, there have been summer conditioning, and the summer conditioning follow the protocols that were outlined through the athletic league. There is a question about students enrolled through open enrollment. Will we be able to stay in your school of choice? So, we know this year is going to be kind of messy, but we want to commit to our families that, if you are attending one of the schools of choice and you've you're in open enrollment to Millikan or to Washington Open or to Central Park or what other program that you what other program you might be in. This year, we're going to attempt to keep everybody in their schools, but there might be, based on demand, there might be a need to have the students be assigned to a teacher that's not at that school. But we know that for the following year, so for 21-22, every student will return to their original schools, so to that home school. And that kind of is the question. The next question that came up was around, will you be assigned to a teacher from the school or will you be assigned from a pool of teachers? It really depends on the numbers and how we can work that out. The first day of school for students will be August the 17th. And I think there was a question about that. The board did update the calendar this past, at this last regular board meeting. Okay, and then will classes be created from the school or mixed based off of who chooses only distance learning? Again, we have to look at the numbers. We would like to keep the classes as pure as they can with their homeschool, but it may be likely that we have to mix students and in this model. So I'd like to go over and move to, there's some questions in operations. So Mr. Dill, I think if you will, okay, so here's question number one. If we decide to send our child back to school, how will the cleaning protocols align with exposure to students being limited? We've been told teachers can't use Clorox wipes. So how do you plan to keep the schools clean and the chemical exposure safe?
So we will have disinfectant materials that are shown to kill the COVID virus available in classrooms. And then also we will have custodians regularly cleaning high touch, high contact areas such as doorknobs, faucet handles, restroom areas, play areas, and desktops, etc. And then every night in the classrooms, we will be going through every classroom with a disinfectant fogger. It's an electrostatic fogger that fine mist clings to everything that's exposed into the classroom. So it's a very fast and easy way to go through and do a disinfecting of a large area.
Thank you. And there was a question that actually came up in the teacher meeting, but again, or in the staff meeting that we had earlier today about the HVAC and how that's going to function this next year for schools that don't have windows that open.
Sure, we have air conditioning throughout the district. And so for those units that were installed recently through our bond program, we know we can go through and reprogram those units all identically so that they will be bringing in as much fresh air as possible rather than recirculating the air inside of the classroom. If classrooms have operable doors, and well, they do have doors, if they have operable windows, they can open those up in addition to the doors to keep the circulation of fresh air coming in. And if there are any settings on those HVAC units that would normally shut off a unit if the doors are open, we can program around those so that we can keep the fans continually running with outdoor air coming in.
Okay, thank you. So I wanted to jump over to teaching and learning, and then we'll go into health and wellness. So the first question here is for Kathy and for Brad is, how did the district evaluate the online learning that took place when school closed for face-to-face instruction? So from last spring's programming, how did you guys evaluate and develop the recommendations for this fall?
Throughout the time that we were in the emergency distance learning that we were in last spring, we were conducting several surveys. We had a couple of parent surveys, one through Thought Exchange and one straight out through SurveyMonkey, several staff surveys, and also just collecting the information that we were getting from not only the community, but internal staff. And knowing, and then again, as I stated in my slides, when I was sharing the distance learning, that is how we are determining the changes. We heard very clearly that more FaceTime with teachers was very important from our parents, and then from our teachers, and then also just managing the digital environment online with students. How much time is the right time to be on a screen as opposed to doing some other activities? So, which is all has to do with developmental appropriateness as well. So we measured all of that, and much of that is the information that has gone into building our sample schedules for this year. And we'll continue to look at that, as well as to look at models, not only internally from our district, but what other districts are doing in our area and also beyond our area.
Kathy, can you talk a little bit about the independent study option and how this option would affect the open enrollment placements? For the parent, I just wanted to say that the open enrollment placements they're guaranteed for the following year. So if you just decide you're going to do independent study, you will have a seat in your open enrollment school when you go back into that. But can you talk a little bit about independent study and how that looks in elementary, how it's different than distance learning really is the key?
Sure. So an independent study model really puts the responsibilities of students getting their schoolwork done on the parent. That's a parent choice. It's much like homeschooling. You will meet with a teacher who would, once a week, the student would meet with a teacher who would go over the work that's coming, take a look at the work that has been turned in, and guide the next steps. The difference is in distance learning, there would be daily contact with the teacher, and the teacher would be mostly responsible for the curriculum delivery and models of instruction. So it is a choice for some parents that may be home that would rather choose that level of responsibility with their child's learning. And so we are trying to determine how to set that up as well as a choice.
Okay, and another question came in around teaching and learning around the grading. What is the plan for grading for next year? And is there an opportunity for students, particularly at the high school and middle school, to choose a credit or no credit? Will that be optional?
So we will be returning to traditional grading as our board policy outlines our traditional grading practices, which are letter grades. Always under those circumstances, we do have individual personalized choice under specific circumstances when students might receive an incomplete or a no credit with a time extension. Those are individual, as I said, individual experiences and situations that we walk through with parents and students on an individual basis, but otherwise we'll be returning to traditional grading.
And the next question, I think it goes a little bit to Mr. Dill. It's related to, and Kathy and Brad, it's around the instruction of distance learning versus hybrid at the high school level, particularly around the class sizes, given the 6 foot distancing that we'll need to do, or the distancing, not necessarily 6 foot, but the distancing protocols we'll need to implement in our high school classrooms.
I'm not sure I understand the question.
So the parents would like more detail regarding the high school programming, the difference between distance learning and hybrid. For example, what is the number of students that we would put in a normal 960 square foot classroom? And are there going to be stable cohorts in the high school?
So I can speak to the difference between the distance and hybrid. In a hybrid model, the sample that you saw today splits a school in half. And so there are half the amount of students. In our comprehensives, that would be about 1,000 students on campus. We are continuing to look at how we shrink that cohort size. But even with a cohort size that big, in looking at the numbers, students would their cohort that they might see in a day would be less than that whole 1,000 students because they'd only be going to 6 classes. So as I said, we're continuing to refine that and figure that out. But even when we do whatever stable cohort we do decide on, it will be critical for in our middle and high schools for masks and cleaning protocols and the physical distancing as much as possible.
So in the high schools, as a former high school administrator, I can talk a little bit about some of the things that our high school principals are considering right now. So, they're looking at crafty ways to build a master schedule for our students, given that the high schoolers will be in class, physically in class 2 days a week. And we want to make sure that we create a schedule. We're really looking at some clever scheduling design. There's some classes that can be taught through distance learning the entire year. And there's some classes that really are more appropriate that students are in class at least for a portion of the time. Career and tech ed, science, and those kinds of classes would lend to in-person instruction. So the high school principals are really looking at clever ways to design their master schedule to provide a balance between some classes being all virtual and some classes being a mix of sometimes in class, sometimes through the hybrid models. So they're working on those details right now. The other thing I think to think about is in high school, where the kids are going to be in assigned seats. So we're really going to be able to contact trace should there be someone who is tested positive for COVID. We'll be able to contact trace back who is sitting around that particular student or who is sitting near the individual who tests positive. So this will give us a way to better support the quarantining guidelines that have been established by the Public Health Department. The next question comes from a kindergarten parent. And we know that kindergarten TK preschool is not optimally taught through distance learning. So as I mentioned earlier, that group of students, the youngest ones, are the ones that would have high priority for us as we begin to shift into in-person. So Kathy, can you talk a little bit about what our kindergarten team is thinking about, our early learning team is thinking about for the launch of the return to school?
Sure. So we had a team of transitional kinder and kindergarten teachers meet today. And what we're doing is, first of all, they're a little different. So our kindergartners usually come the first day for 100 minutes in order to have some orientation time, and also some parent orientation time. So we are talking about how do we do that virtually so that students can still build relationships with teachers as we start in a distance learning situation for students who haven't been to our schools yet. And then typically our kinders have 3 weeks of modified schedules. And so in doing so, we'll be able to build in some of those relationship building opportunities with not only their teacher, but with their peers. There is also time built into schedules for teachers to have small group or one-on-one times that when it is safe and the protocols are in place, we could do in person. So we're looking at all of that. But certainly as soon as we can move to hybrid, if we were to phase in our young TK, kinder, and first grade would be our first grades to get started on that phase in. So we know that they need to be in school with their teachers as much as possible. And so as soon as it is safe to do so, they will be our priority.
Thank you. Kathy, there was and Brad, there was a question here around making distance learning more effective, engaging for high school. Can you talk a little bit about, and Brad, I think you could talk a little bit about the Canvas program and what they're doing to kind of beef up our high school program offerings they're working on in curriculum.
Sure. So one thing that's going on is teams of teachers and central office instructional specialists are creating curriculum units that are grounded in the essential standards, but that are designed to be more interactive and also to be more project-based, so that students will have the opportunity to engage in high interest and meaningful activities and not just a series of daily lessons. We're also providing professional development for teachers in this, and they are going to be sharing their essentially model curriculum unit developments across the schools at the high school and the middle schools as well. So that teachers will have the benefit of an array of high quality curriculum and not be relying just upon themselves individually to have to generate all of the curriculum. Secondly, we're going to be piloting a learning management system called Canvas that also has an array of exemplar units and lessons from around the country from all different schools that are part of the Canvas network. And this will allow teachers much more easily through the use of a dashboard to design and essentially upload lessons and units. It will allow parents and students to more easily access those, and for teachers to do ongoing assessment, to provide feedback to students on work that is underway before it's finalized, to allow for discussion groups, and allow for more easier sharing of units, lessons, and assessments. So this is really in the spirit of building upon our learning from the spring and creating a continuously improving distance learning program that can also easily shift into and support hybrid learning if and when we go there. The other thing that we're going to be doing is prioritizing science labs and career technical education through live streaming efforts, so that students, if they're not allowed to be in school yet with their teachers, will at least have the benefit of teachers doing demonstration lessons and follow up with different digital tools and applications that will allow them to engage in simulations as well, which we also know to be high interest to students. So that's some of the exciting work that's underway, and people are working very hard to provide your children with the highest quality distance learning program that we can possibly provide.
Thank you, Brad. We have a couple of questions here that I'm just going to answer. One was around keeping families in the same cohort. A parent asked, I have a middle school student and a high school student. If we safely transition to a hybrid model, will both my children be able to be in the same cohort with matching schedules? Absolutely. That's what our intent is, to help families out with that. And if you are a parent and that doesn't happen to you, let's make sure that you contact your school so we can get this corrected. Will students with pre-existing conditions be able to continue to do distance learning? So I want to say yes. And if parents want to enroll in the distance learning, you'll have an opportunity to do that through SchoolMint, and the link will open up on July the 17th. So you can make that request through SchoolMint. And don't forget to update your information, your student information. That's where we're doing our annual information updates. Will we be given the schedule in advance? And if so, how far before the first day of school? And so we're working on that right now. I don't know if this is from an elementary parent or from a middle school or high school parent. We will likely have everything ready to go at the beginning of August. But it all depends on the school, and things are going to change. So we're going to have to be really flexible this year and adaptable, because as we start to shift back and forth, we will have to adjust the schedules, particularly if we start running buses, because we have a fixed number of buses, and we have students that we need to transport, and we need to do that safely. So we want to make sure we get everybody who needs to ride the bus to school, and that is kind of like, I call that the tail that wags the dog. Okay, so grading. We already talked a little bit about grading. We are going back to grading, and the teachers. There's a question about homework being mandatory. Well, homework policy is that homework is supposed to support the instruction in the class, and there are times where students will do work in the presence of the teacher, but there also will be time where students will have to do work outside class. And particularly when we go to a project-based learning model, there will be a lot of work students are going to have to do to prepare when they're in person in class. And so they'll have to complete that work outside the classroom during the hybrid learning. Will materials be provided to students? Yes. And we're still working out the details on that. Uh, let's see. I think we're getting over to health and wellness now. There was a question from a family that is actually overseas right now. And they said, because of the time difference, should we be an independent study? And the answer is yes. You should be an independent study. You'll need to work with your independent study teacher. And then when you return to school, you may have to stay in the independent study until we get to a trimester or semester break. And then you can re-enroll, you can move your student to another program, but you can't do it unless we're at one of those breaking points. Okay, and so and this is the same question another parent asked. It says, it is mentioned that parents will have the option of sticking with distance learning throughout the year and that there will be flexibility to toggle back and forth. You can only toggle back and forth between programs if there's space and if it's at a semester break or a trimester break. So you won't be able to just go back and forth between programs, because we have to staff our classes. Parent support. So I'm going to ask Brenda to step in now. Parent engagement falls underneath her, and we'll talk a little bit about our FRC and parent support for our families. So can you talk a little bit about what y'all are thinking about over there?
Absolutely. Our Family Resource Center staff has been working really hard to find different ways to engage families online. We are going to be offering and have been offering over the summer some parenting classes, and we expect to be able to continue to offer those. We are also going to be offering classes that will help to build connection between students and their parents, children and their parents, such as painting or other types of sort of play therapy kinds of classes. And we expect to be able, if at all, to resume our food distribution and our school supply distribution in the fall, following, of course, all of the guidelines that we have. We're also working very closely with our school sites to reach out to parents and to do that proactively, and then to connect them to the Family Resource Center when they have needs that are outside of what the school might be able to provide. Our schools do have wellness centers. We have lots of support services on our school sites. And so parents can access those at the school site, or they can come over to the Family Resource Center and we can provide support there as well.
Okay, thank you. And there was another question here about, Brenda, about somebody changed the color on one of these questions for me, about parent volunteers. Can you talk a little bit about that, what the Public Health Department is saying about parent volunteering in their stable cohorted classrooms?
Yes, we definitely understand that we have many schools and classrooms that depend on or have functioned using parent volunteers. At this point, the guidance that we have received, unfortunately, is that we cannot have parent volunteers continuing to be in classrooms.
So and we had a question here also about if a student or a parent becomes sick with COVID or exposed and they're required to quarantine, what's the process that we're going to do during that time? I can answer that, or Brenda, if you would like to answer that, that would be okay.
A student, can you repeat the questions?
If somebody within a stable cohort, so we're back in person, someone in a stable cohort gets sick or gets exposed to COVID and we have to quarantine, what's the process that's going to happen when we have to move a class into quarantine?
Well, we have our school nurses that are working on protocols that will outline exactly what has to happen and within what time frame. Those protocols are being developed alongside guidance with the Public Health Department. And so we will be sharing those protocols, but in essence, we'll be communicating with the Public Health Department, we'll be following protocols, we'll be communicating with the family and following that guidance.
Okay. So thank you very much, Brenda. Kathy, I'd like to ask the question about the instructional minutes that we answered for the staff. The same question has come up again around the length of the school day and how we have to track and monitor instructional minutes now into this next phase.
Sure. The guidelines from the state, the instructional minute requirement from the state is for our younger students, kindergarten through TK through second grade. The requirements are a minimum of 230 minutes a day. And for our older students through 12th grade, it's 240 minutes per day. We do have written into our teacher's contract more instructional minutes than that it just exceed that. And so we will be working with our unions to work on that, but hopefully having as much instructional minutes as we have when we're in person. We are required to track and make sure that every student, whether in the distance learning or they're in person, have that 230 or 240 minutes per day. And I just want to add for kinder, if you were to look up kinder minutes, you would see that it says 180, but our district many years ago went to a full day, what's called extended day kindergarten, and we are required to have as many minutes in kindergarten as we have in our first and second grades. So we will be determining how we can track the distance learning minutes as well as the in-person minutes, because we will need to keep all of those minutes up to that level of a minimum of 230 or 240 minutes per day, every day for the 180 days that we are required to have.
So the next question that we have here, thank you. And I wanted to also let parents know that, with the instructional minutes, we will have a process where the teachers are going to identify the amount of time that certain activities take. And so, in a classroom, very often students are working independently on an activity, and they can do that independent work also through the face-to-face time during the distance learning. So it's not that the teacher will be speaking for the whole 230 minutes, but that students will be given some independent work time where the teacher may have them in breakout rooms, but they'll still be working on activities related to the instruction. So one of the things that the question was asked this evening was around this consistency around face coverings for our young children. The Public Health Department, Santa Clara County, and the reopening document from the County Health Department and the County Office of Education did not mandate that our elementary students wear face coverings. And the reasoning behind that was there's scientific reasoning behind that in the transmission. However, they are encouraging it. And so to the extent possible, we are going to expect our elementary students to wear their face coverings when they're in their classroom. But there are times when they may be working, independently, and they may not have to have their face covering on, but certainly when they're sitting on the carpet and the teacher is reading to them, or they're having a group activities at a table, they will have their face, they'll be expected to wear that face covering, their mask and whatnot. But we don't want to create an environment in our schools where students are scared in their stable cohorts to remove their mask. It's not healthy for our young children to be fearful in that stable environment. So the Public Health Department in Santa Clara County has said, if you can stabilize your cohort and make sure that the adults are wearing masks, that you can create a safe space for the students. In addition, utilizing the sanitizing and the safety protocols of washing your hands and so on, and wearing your mask when you're outside the classroom would be more appropriate for this age group. So we don't want to discipline students, a kindergartner or first grader, if they have to remove their mask, but we certainly will encourage them and continue to provide training to the students and to their families to understand the critical nature of this. This matter is evolving, and our Public Health Department and the Santa Clara County Office of Education will be hosting a webinar on Friday, and it will be available for folks to watch following the webinar about the science of reopening schools. And so I encourage our community to take this opportunity to listen to what the Public Health Department and local physicians are saying regarding this. There was a question, Brenda, about telehealth, and if you could talk a little bit about will telehealth be available to students that are younger than 4th grade?
Yes, telehealth will be available to students that are younger, that are in 4th grade and younger, all students.
Okay, perfect. And then there was another question here around if somebody is diagnosed with COVID and what are the protocols for that. We will have written protocols. They're working on a flow chart now from the county health department and the county office of education to support our schools. One of the things that, and we'll go over this in greater detail with our parents, and we'll have more information for you regarding if there's a potential exposure and what we would do, or if somebody is diagnosed, what the process will be for that. Certainly, if a class goes into quarantine and everyone is quarantined together because there's been an exposure, you can continue to have the class through distance learning. And if somebody is sick, then they're sick. That's, but they will be in quarantine, and we're still working out the details on all of that. It's so very complicated. So what symptoms will you be monitoring? We will actually have a document for our families regarding symptom monitoring. And in the county public health department, it talks about one or more of the following symptoms, and includes cough, headache, and so on. So, if you go back to that, there will be a document for parents also to complete and before students come to school each day. And so we're working on all of those protocols for the parents. That last spring, before we went into the shelter in place and we closed schools, the symptom monitoring said 2 or more of the following symptoms, and it had a list of like 7 or 8 symptoms. And then with the new reopening that we got from the county Office of Education, it said 1 or more. So we're still working with Carolyn Riley, our district nurse, and with the county Office of Ed and Public Health Department to get cleaner guidance on that issue. So we have nearly gone through all of the questions, all the questions that came up. There's some one-offs that occurred. It is about 10 after 6 now, and I want to say that we had in this webinar 1,151 attendees. I want to thank you for attending this evening, and we had 644 questions. So with that in mind, I want to thank everyone for joining us this evening, and we will have another session in Spanish for our Spanish-speaking parents in about 20 minutes. And then tomorrow evening will be a board meeting where the board will, who is listening, by the way, all of our trustees are in this meeting this evening, listening in to your questions and comments. They will get a copy of the questions that were asked so they can see that. And our team is taking your questions that you've submitted and will be utilizing that to create an FAQ and to refine our program. And lastly, I'd like to just remind parents that the Thought Exchange is still open. I encourage you to go in. The link to the Thought Exchange is on our website. Please go in, leave your feedback for us. It's important. It helps us to design a program that will meet the needs of your family and your child. So with that, I want to say thank you again. Have a wonderful evening.